Ahora no sabrán.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Ryan. Hello, Maria Lourdes.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Kira.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi everyone.
أهلا وسهلا فيكم.
يا هلا دكتورة منيرة، حياك الله.
أهلا وسهلا أستاذ ابتسام، عساك بخير.
بخير، عساك بخير.
If you want, we can just wait maybe a couple minutes, if you don't mind. Hello, Dr. Maria.
Virtual Never System.
We can begin, everyone. Good evening and a warm welcome to all of you in our workshop, Translating Oral Traditions and the Safeguarding of Cultural Heritage. I am Munira Al-Ghadir, and I'm delighted to begin this two-day virtual workshop, and I hope you can hear me clearly.
Very clearly.
Yes.
Thank you. This event represents the culmination productive discussions held between January and April 2024, building upon an established collaboration on intangible heritage between 4 UNESCO chairs, including our own, and the Heritage Commission. Thank you for your valuable contribution and support during the planning and preparation of this event. The UNESCO Chair in Translating Cultures, inaugurated in October in 2023, with the support of the Literature, Publishing and Translation Commission, promotes a more inclusive and diverse approach to translation studies with a focus on Arabic and Middle Eastern perspectives and South-South collaboration. Our research spans a range of thematic areas, from translation studies and cultural studies to intangible heritage and artificial intelligence. This workshop brings together distinguished guest speakers, UNESCO chairs, renowned scholars, heritage practitioners, public sector agencies, and promising young researchers, including talented Saudi women scholars. And I welcome them, and I'm so proud of them. We will explore the interconnected oral tradition of the Global South, focusing on storytelling and folklore and preserving cultural heritage and histories across diverse regions like Morocco, Spain, North Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. Our collaborative discussions have shaped key concepts and questions for explorations addressing the challenges and opportunities facing intangible heritage and oral traditions today. We aim to foster a cross-interdisciplinary and transnational dialogue with objectives including fostering joint research projects, analyzing the intercultural significance of oral traditions and translations, assessing their role in sustaining intangible heritage, and sharing best practices for their preservations. It is now my distinct pleasure to include and introduce Professor Francesca Orsini, our chair for this workshop this evening. Professor Orsini is a distinguished literary historian whose work illuminates the dynamic multilingualism of South Asian literary cultures, with a particular focus on Hindi and Urdu. Her research spans a wide range of topics, from the vibrant Hindi literary sphere of the 1920s and 30s, the subject of her PhD from SOAS, to the fascinating history of the 19th century publishing and the proliferations of oral literary genres. Professor Orsini's current work includes a book on the multilingual literary history and her leadership of the prestigious ERC-funded project entitled Multilingual Locals and Significant Geographies for a New Approach to World Literature. This project offers a groundbreaking, geographically grounded and multilingual approach toward literature, examining North India, the Maghreb, and the Horn of Africa within colonial and post-colonial and contemporary global contexts. Professor Orsini's extensive publications have made significant contribution to the field. She is a fellow of the British Academy and has held visiting positions at Columbia University and the University of Penn, as well as fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University. We are honored to have her with us this evening. And I will now hand it over to you, Professor Orsini, and I look forward to our workshop, discussion, and debates later on, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Munira, if I may, and thank you for the introduction. I will just send you in the chat. The reason I think I'm here because of as part of the of this project that that Munira just mentioned, which actually was an attempt to do kind of South-South collaboration, and even in a sense without assuming interconnections. No, so we were delighted when we found some, but we didn't start out thinking that there would be necessarily interconnections between North India, the Maghreb, and the Horn of Africa from the point of view of literary studies. And our book with Oral Literary Worlds, in which Sadhna, Professor Sadhna Naitani also has a chapter, and in fact one of the chapters is on the Halqa of Beni Mellal in Morocco by Fatima Zahra Salih, has just come out last month. And really, I mean, our concerns were partly, of course, the concerns of this workshop, but we came from another perspective, or you could say of exclusion or marginalization of oral, orature, oral literature, oral traditions, however we want to call it, which is that of world literature, which typically makes a kind of gesture towards orality and oral literature, but then if we think of the most influential definition, David Damrosch's, of world literature as that which circulates beyond the culture of origin and is read as literature, you can already see that in fact several, or even of the traditions that our contributors speak about in the book, do not travel. Some of course do, but some don't. And they are not read as literature. They may circulate and be transmitted over also written, but also audiovisual or purely oral forms across a range of platforms. But that in a way would already disqualify them as world literature. And our question is, what does world literature lose? In fact, it loses a lot if, by sticking to strict definitions, it leaves all this all these worlds of orature, which in fact are not just part of the past, as of course your work shows, but are very much part of our present. And again, not just beyond, Europe, the West, and so on, but very much, in Italy, in England, and so on. Just think of, spoken word poetry or storytelling across a range of platforms. So I think I'll stop here on my bit, but I'm looking forward to really learning from, the work that you've already done, and particularly, hope that we can think ahead to possible collaborations, and to also maybe, I could see already from the abstract that we have certain examples where transmission and translation work in a really original way, and other ways in which instead transmission or, the safeguarding patronage are missing, and then things get lost, or and then there is the question of across regions, which Sadhna will partly talk about in her contribution. So I think I'll stop here. If you don't mind, I won't introduce you widely, because otherwise, you only have 10-12 minutes and all the time will be gone. So in fact, I think I can probably stop here and give and ask our first speaker, Dr. Maria Lourdes Rubio Rico, the UNESCO chair in intercultural dialogue in the Mediterranean from the University of Rovira e Virgili in Catalonia, to speak on storytelling heritage, connecting hearts, bridging cultures. And I'm glad we start on a hopeful note.
Thank you, Dr. Francesca Orsini. Thank you, everybody for being here. I'm going to try to share my presentation. Yeah. Can you see it? Yes? Okay, can you hear me well, I hope?
Very well.
So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are now. My name is Lourdes Rubio, and I'm here representing the UNESCO Chair for Intercultural Dialogue at the Mediterranean at the Rovira e Virgili University in Tarragona, Spain. Before I begin, of course, I would like to thank the UNESCO Chair for Translating Culture, for organizing this event, and for inviting us to participate in it. The experience I'm going to talk about has its origins in the Scenario Project, a European project in which we were responsible, among other things, for creating a digital narrative about a UNESCO World Heritage Site for educational and cultural promotion purposes. The first challenge we had when we tried to organize this experience was to choose a UNESCO World Heritage Site to talk about. We chose the monastery of Poblet. But the biggest challenge in this project was not to make Poblet Cistercian Monastery famous. It's already well known and loved. It was to give you an idea of what this is like. You should know that about 80,000 people visit this place every year, and if you do an online search, you'll get hundreds of thousands of results. Poblet is an important part of Catalonia's heritage, both in its buildings and the stories connected to it. In 1991, UNESCO recognizes it as a World Heritage Site, but Poblet Monastery is more than its stones, history, or beautiful surroundings. Part of its value comes from the people who have loved it, respected it, and kept it alive over time. This value is not only found in big events, but also in small personal stories. when we were designing the experience, there were two ideas in our minds that were absolutely clear. We wanted to tell new things about Poblet, and because we believe strongly in the social value of research, we wanted to listen to different voices. Which ones? On the one hand, we chose the voices of elderly people in elderly homes who had a connection with the monastery of Poblet. And on the other hand, we wanted to give a voice to unaccompanied young migrants. And when we had these requirements, firstly, both of them are voices that are often silenced. People talk about them, but they are not often asked. We also believe that asking older people to tell their stories about Poblet would give them recognition, emotion, and meaning. It gives them the joy of connecting with their memories, the feeling of being needed to add value to our heritage, and the feeling of being useful. On the other hand, giving a voice to young migrants who are in our country without family could help them to build new relationships and could give them the satisfaction of making older people happy. By choosing this perspective, we are not just telling a different story of Poblet Monastery. We are also showing that every voice matters and that heritage is something that belongs to all of us. Our plan was simple. We had to find all the people who had an emotional attachment to Poblet Monastery and ask them to tell their stories about this place to a young and accompanied migrant. The next step would be to ask the young person to translate the older person's story into a small work of art, such as a painting, a piece of music, a photograph, or any other artistic format. We would record the whole conversation and artistic process, and the result of this recording would be our storytelling about Poblet. 5 residents of a local nursing home joined our project, and Brother Joseph from the Poblet community also participated. The government organization that looks after children and young people without families in our country helped us find young migrants with some kind of talent who wanted to join. Once we found all participants, we made pairs to work together. We introduced them and make them sure they got to know each other. Here you can see an image of the process of getting to know each other. And so we went to Poblet. It was exciting to leave the elderly people's home after being locked up for almost 2 years because of the pandemic. We wanted to talk, listen, share experiences, and be together. And we had a lot of questions to ask and many memories to evoke. We listened again to stories of the Spanish Civil War, which we had already forgotten. We visited every inch of the monastery that was significant to the storytellers in one way or another, and the young participants discovered a universe completely unknown to them. We didn't have enough eyes or ears to see and hear all the new things that were being presented to us. We made friends, we were friends, and the days of discovery in the monastery were followed by the work of creation. We accompanied the young people in their creative work and helped them to make artistic use of the stories. And finally, we finished the work. In total, the young people produced 2 paintings, 2 songs, a paper sculpture, and a photographic story on the full experience. And once the work was finished, we spent another day together, during which the young artist gave their artistic productions to the older people. For its part, the organization prepared a small gift for all the participants of the scenario project as a reminder of the experience. This gift consisted of a drawing, like you can see in this slide, of each participant with his or her partner. In another slide, you can see each of these drawings. This project showed how heritage can bring together people from different generations, cultures, and religions. It helped people understand and respect each other. For the other people, the project let them share their life stories and use their memories. And for the young people, perhaps it helped to break down prejudice against them and show their creativity and care. Through this experience, we saw a new way of understanding Poblet's monastery heritage, focusing in its emotional and social importance. The project also showed how it's important to listen to people who are often ignored. It showed that heritage can help bring people together, improve well-being, and give a fresh and a new view on culture and history. Finally, here you have a link to a video of the whole process. We hope that the stories told will help you to get to know the monastery of Poblet better and to consider the emotional value of heritage as another aspect of the wealth of heritage that need to be based on. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question, I will be happy to try to answer it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question and answer session after 3 speakers. So we are doing very, very good timing. And so we can go on and, have perhaps a longer, certainly I have questions and wonderful work. So our next 2 speakers are Ibtisam Al-Wahaibi, I hope I'm saying it right, and Haifa Al-Humaydan from the South Heritage Commission, talking on Nabati poetry, an oral tradition rooted in Saudi Arabia's cultural heritage. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I would like first to thank the King Faisal Center for Research and the UNESCO Chair for this opportunity, Dr. Munira Al-Ghadir in specific, and also the CEO of the Heritage Commission, Dr. Jasser Al-Harbish, who is also on the advisory board of the UNESCO Chair. For us, the Saudis, oral traditions have long shaped our societies. It preserved knowledge, history, and values. It transmitted knowledge through generations way before written language. And as part of Heritage Commission's efforts in safeguarding these traditions, we have exerted some efforts, whether it's archiving or engaging communities or preserving those traditions by getting them recognized on international lists. And for these few minutes, allow us to share some of these efforts. I will pass the mic first to my colleague Haifa Al-Humaydan to start on shedding the light of some of these activities, and then I will talk more about our role in preserving them with recognition to UNESCO. Haifa, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank the UNESCO Chair. I would like to thank Dr. Munira Al-Ghadir, specifically Dr. Jasser Al-Harbish, and Ms. Ibtisam Al-Wahaibi for allowing me to be part of this today. I would like to talk about documentation as a safeguarding initiative, specifically the National Inventory of Intangible Heritage. A cornerstone of the Commission's approach is the development of a comprehensive national inventory of intangible cultural elements. This digital platform, hosted on secure servers, serves as a repository for safeguarding oral traditions and expressions along with other recognized domains. The inventory currently comprises of 1,200 video recordings, 700 plus audio files, 4,200 photographic records, over 4,000 documented element bearers. It still amazes me until this time. Among the key categories included is the inventory are spoken narratives, oral poetry, and other expressive traditions, which form an essential component of Saudi Arabia's intangible cultural heritage. The platform is equipped with an advanced search engine, allowing researchers, policymakers, and the general public to explore elements by domain, category, region, city, gender, and even period of practice. This functionality not only facilitates academic research, but also enhances public accessibility and engagement with Saudi Arabia's oral heritage. Given the dynamic nature of oral traditions, the platform is as fluid and is designed for continuous updates reflecting the evolving landscape of intangible heritage and ensuring both cultural continuity and innovation. Moving to the next point is the promotion and transmission through community-led initiatives. In addition to documentation, the Heritage Commission actively collaborates with local communities, cultural stakeholders, and both official and non-official cultural institutions to support the promotion and transmission of oral traditions. A key example of the Commission's engagement with the Saudi Arabian Society for Culture and Arts, which played a vital role in supporting the Nabati poets through organized poetry evenings, competitions, particularly on Founding Day celebrations. On a national scale, the Ministry of Culture has further reinforced these efforts through initiatives such as the Year of Arabic Poetry in 2023, which featured regional poetry contests and the participation of Nabati poets from across the Gulf. These initiatives not only provided platforms for oral poets to showcase their artistry, but also contribute to the intergenerational transmission of traditional poetic forms, ensuring the relevance to the contemporary society. The Heritage Commission multifaceted approach to safeguarding oral traditions through digital documentation, public accessibility, and active community engagement demonstrates a commitment to preserving Saudi Arabia's rich intangible cultural heritage. As we navigate challenges of modernization, these efforts serve as a model for sustainable heritage preservation, balancing tradition with innovation. Next, my colleague, Ms. Ibtisam Luhaibi, and my manager, and my mentor as well. She will be talking about the Nabati poetry on UNESCO's representative list of intangible heritage of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haifa. I guess we were too excited to ask for the slides to be shifted. So if you can kindly move to the next slide. And the other one. So Haifa already covered that part of our efforts into safeguarding oral tradition as part of intangible cultural heritage. If we could move also to the next slide, please. And the next one. So shedding the light specifically on our efforts into leading joint files that are part of UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. Saudi Arabia as a state, as a member state that ratified the 2003 convention, has a commitment towards promoting cultural heritage and fostering communities into showcasing their intangible cultural heritage. We work with the other countries in the area into leading joint files that would celebrate such traditions. We have led multiple files in different areas of intangible cultural heritage, whether it's knowledge of the universe or culinary arts or performing arts. And the current file that we're working on is leading on an oral tradition. The community of poets has asked the Heritage Commission and other national commissions across the Arab region to join efforts into submitting this file to recognize Nabati poetry as a vessel that communicates oral traditions, shared values, sometimes messages of love or friendship or other kinds of emotional emotions and values as well. So we gathered with communities all across the kingdom. We have met with representatives from all 13 regional parts of the kingdom. We have gathered the thoughts of the communities. We have gathered the thoughts of poets, of singers, of people who use poetry or particularly Nabati poetry as means of conveying messages. We have looked into ways of suggesting safeguarding measures and transmitting this knowledge to future generations, whether it's individual initiatives from NGOs or initiatives from local governmental entities or entities that are considered private parts, initiatives that supported those poets in terms of funds or sustainable or making this a sustainable living for them. And then we gathered all of these information. We worked with our colleagues in 11 Arab states that have agreed to join this multinational file. And we have created kind of task forces to go ahead and research and meet with communities across those countries. We have gathered all these information into one submission form, and now we're in the final edits of filling those forms and getting the required documents, whether they are testimonies of locals that they are happy actually and encourage this inscription. We gathered photos, we gathered videos, we gathered oral testimonies from male and female poets, and we're looking into submitting all of this by end of March 2025, in hopes that this oral tradition will get recognized and announced by end of 2026, inshallah. So this is in a nutshell. We're happy to answer any questions regarding the Heritage Commission's efforts into fostering and promoting oral traditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibtisam. Thank you, Haifa. Again, very happy, seems a very happy and smooth program of collaboration between a state, or a kind of national institution and local communities. As you were talking, I was thinking of India, and I was thinking of, or in fact, even our experience in Addis Ababa, out of which the volume I was telling you about, where, basically if one community spoke up, the other walked out of the room, so I'm certainly curious to know how you manage and what to do also in terms of getting state patronage, but also, working across, perhaps across communities. But anyway, so we are again doing very good time. You're all being very, very good. Our next speaker, and then we can have, please write down your questions or put them in the chat for the discussion Q&A, is Jude Al-Thukair, an independent researcher who's going to tell us about telling the city's ancestors as historians, documenting home and migration in oil boom Unaiza.
Hello, Francesca. Hello, everyone. My name is Judith Kher. I'm a researcher, poet, multimedia artist. I recently finished up my master's in comparative literature and critical translation from the University of Oxford, which much of that work cited your research, Francesca, that I am very grateful for. Much of my research is about migration, oral traditions, and family. Writing about family has been a reflex for me. I will be sharing my presentation. I got very excited and forgot to share. Is my screen visible? Okay.
Yes.
So writing about family has been a reflex for me since my undergraduate studies. It came from a place of cavity when I couldn't trace back my fifth grandmother on both my parents' sides. It became both an impetus and a responsibility to excavate. The ancestors whose names are unknown to me were once very much known by many people across time. And so this project began in 2021, but was only executed during early of last year. And during the initial research stages, it was essential for me to decide that this doesn't become a nostalgic project. In fact, it resists, demythologizes, and destabilizes notions of nostalgia, mainly because it creates a downfall of a fake utopia, a what once was. Which only creates a hindrance. And so later we do see moments of reminiscence from my interviews with my grandparents, but the primary intention of this project is for it to be archival. And I also understand that it cannot be objective because I'm an inheritor of this history. In a speculative mode, though, family histories can be a source of power. It is an act of taking permission to imagine the intimacies that official archives cannot contain. Here, photographs and oral narratives offer a prism through which to study the postmodern space of cultural memory, composed of leftovers, debris, single items that are left to be collected and assembled in many ways, to tell a variety of stories from a variety of often competing perspectives. And so the question always arises, how does memory become its own form of history? And how can we push for oral narratives to become their own mode of history making? And so this picture, I grew up seeing it on my grandfather's desktop. It collects much of my ancestors. The man in a turban is my paternal grandfather, who wears it casually because he was influenced by his time in Basra in Iraq. And so I had so much connection with the men across this picture. And so this picture also exists as a seal of authenticity per se, to show that عنيزة was a median space amid migration. And so the ongoing phrase was بيزة على بيزة توديك عنيزة, and that is penny on top of penny, you can return home. And this was taken circa 1960s. So to me, the picture exists because something was there, and thus in my own family pictures, I can find some intimacies about our histories. So this is one of the many poems that are shaped by my oral interviews with my grandfather, who remains a collaborator in this ethno-poetry project. It was essential to preserve his agency, and I'm only a vessel carrying his voice. His emphatic exclamatory tones remain intact, ensuring that the rhythm and urgency of his storytelling are not lost in the act of transcription. No bicycles were allowed. كان لازم permit. حصان إبليس. First was your grandfather, أبو your grandma, as in your grandmother from milk. كل أحد أخو كل أحد. His was the only house with electricity before the company. حاطة في غرفة جابة من البحرين. And to Bahrain he will return. The first year we went to عنيزة, ركبنا ماكينة كهرب كبيرة بالبرغوش in the mud house, so big we shared it with the masjid and the neighbors. Oh, استانسوا. They were overjoyed, and we set it up on a barren land away from its noise. بيتين ثلاثة نفتحهم, 2 or 3 houses. During our visits, we would scatter and sleep on rooftops. Can no aircon, no fans, no diesel after midnight. نروح نركض كل واحد يزين فراشه بالسطح with water and water, lest the heat dries us up. It was so nice, the quiet days. The first sightings of bicycles, once called Satan's horse, and the inception or arrival of electricity from Bahrain through Indian Ocean trade, offer a glimpse of what عنيزة was. Through my grandfather's memory, he becomes his own historian or a historian of the landscape. His way of storytelling was already rhythmic and melodic, which naturally shaped the poetry in this project. But beyond content, form also mattered. I chose to center the language that makes us us, resisting conventions of translation and capitalization. English exists here, but on specific terms. It carries the work, but does not contain it. This was a way to challenge its dominance as a globalized language while still using it as a bridge. These oral narratives insist on being read as they were spoken, granting themselves the permission to narrate. And so pictures of deceased family members provoked moments of self-recognition, which in the interview process becomes a process of self-discovery. And after gaining access to the family archive, I was able to merge pictures and words to articulate poetry pictures, such as the absent image of the ancestor, which exists only in oratory memory. Narrative and image here are intricately entangled in a web, which work in collaboration to tell a complicated story. And so when planning the blueprints of this project, it became necessary to map the relevant spaces in my elders' narratives to place these poems in geolocations. This allowed me to later revisit these sites and compare now historical ruins or newly built commercial areas to what used to be, per se, my great uncle's house. Also, being able to visit and exist in the host location of the project during these interviews enabled me to provoke more narratives, and so space equals history. An example of such is this poem, which I will be reading. It was born after one of our site visits to the old farm, where my grandfather and his father hosted guests before the Gulf War. I was able to enter a space of hospitality, of noise, of social and cultural creation. Al-Walid hosted 3 gatherings in Ghazaliya. Mashallah, its gates were always flooded with sound. At morning, they played balot. Who? The guests, Jude. They would be a specific type of guests. But in the afternoons, they're more mature. Gray hair, all sunken suns, and worn teeth, more deen and sleep schedules. Ghazaliya was all heads. In the Dekka, it was always tea and coffee, and mashallah in front of our eyes. Spoons and glass like a wind chime, 3 or 4 gahwajiya, not just Ali. At night, it was the poets who stayed until dawn, cracking jokes, and by the time we hosted every man in the Khalij, we'd start all over again. It was a trek going to Ghazaliya back then, sand and rocks wedged between our toes, more than 30 minutes from Dira. By car? Of course, otherwise our feet wouldn't carry us, but we always came from Kuwait or Riyadh. No, we never stopped in Riyadh. And they would meet us in the middle, yumkin 80 kilos or 300 outside Aneza. Cousins, relatives, men camped outside for us like a kashta, Uncle Muhammad, Uncle Ibrahim, all of them. So you don't lose your way? No, out of excitement. Such an ordinary thing. Crowded dunes, full of men, overjoyed men, and mashallah, it never stopped. In this mutated language, English is the vehicle of the work, but not the container. This is a subversive act of appropriating a language once considered a property of the Western side of the Orientalist divide to express the other's point of view. Here, I am able to move through material and temporal geographies, shifting between translation and transliteration of my grandfather's oral narration as a mode of meaning making. In the final section of the presentation, I stand on Taule Goff's shoulders, noting that histories that do not conform to patriarchy are conveniently and consistently absent. In the archive, genealogy is a gendered practice of exclusion, and I cannot say women have been erased since their names were barely recorded to begin with. In Veto Against Cartography, my great-great-aunt Hissa recited a poem for my great-grandfather and his brother, 11 and 14 respectively, when they needed to migrate to Bahrain for trade. And so Hissa did not manage to say goodbye to her brothers and later passed at the age of 16 before seeing them again. The ship has sailed, the ship and my teeth all braids and lineage. Blood spooling in prayers, light, Ya Hayy ihfadh ikhwani, pearls and cardamom and see, my brother, see me, shadow. والعين عيت تباتي يا خوي غصب عليا. Live I live for you and him, my veins, my jugular. عسى يشوف حقولكم, apricots and palm leaves, home, water of my eyes, my teeth. In this erasure of her poem, I attempt to make conversation with Aunt Hissa as a globalized body that exists in a bilingual space, and therefore I am able to stretch language and contextualize her narrative amid this human amnesia. I also use the Arabic as a form of excavation to cut the cord of disappearance and give voice to what has been buried. It is the interweaving of the present with the absent by way of preservation that I utilize these poems as archival material. Additionally, the shedding light of travel and migration is a temporal marker, a seal of authenticity, as mentioned before, via loss and grief. And so this poem enabled me to enter ethnopoetics as a way of excavation, where storytelling is a form of justice. The other poem, Archipelago Seance with Four Mothers, reads as يا حي خطي لافي من شفاتي يا ما لها أكثر من ذليل التحية يا حافظة في البير وحافظ شفاتي احفظ إخواني عن تروس المنية البارحة والعين عيت تباتي ومن الوله يا أخوي غصب عليا عسى يشوفوا حبولكم وارداتي ومن جودك لا تكف الشفية. In the same vein as giving justice, previously featured in an erasure, this poem gives voice to my aunt's poem where there's no official mode of translating al-harakat. This poem requires the reader to stay silent. It highlights al-harakat, and because there is no form of translation, it disrupts the required syntax to enter the Western canon. And so it does not make room for interruption. And like a poem that is delivered orally, the reader must pause. And so I introduced this process as distillation, which is my own attempt of anti-translation. And so when the subject of the poem has been historically forgotten, this is how I attempt to amplify their voice. Aunt Hissa disappeared twice, once in the family tree and the other in the archive. And here on her behalf, I demand the reader's silence. Finally, Aunt Hissa enabled me to create a counter archive. She is a poet who doesn't know she's a poet, and like my grandfather, is a historian that doesn't know is a historian. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, my contact information is below.
Thank you very much, Jude. Also wonderful presentation. So now we have a good 20 minutes for questions, for things that connect the various, perhaps connects the various papers or connects the presentations to your own work. I see there was one in the a question in the chat, but I think probably about is there a program in Saudi Arabia that focuses on this methodology of oral transmission. So there's one. Noof, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Francesca. I have a question, a more general question about methodologies and theoretical approaches that I might leave to the end if you'll let me. But one thing that came to mind specifically from Jude's presentation and also Ibtisam and Haifa's presentation is the issue of archival practices. And I wonder whether we can rethink archival practices to incorporate kind of this performative and these embodied dimensions of oral traditions, and whether we can move away from the textual and think more about kind of creative ways to archive these kinds of traditions, because it's very obvious from all three presentations that these are definitely dynamic and living traditions that are constantly changing. So I just kind of throw that out to the floor and see if anyone has some remarks on that.
Yes, and maybe we can collect a couple, and I can see that there's another one for Ibtisam in the chat. Any other questions, or we can start with those again? Maybe just riding on Noof's question. I mean, your narrative. I mean, as Noof said, you know, yours and Ibtisam and Haifa and Jude's almost were, you know, polar contrasts of each other. No, yours seemed like a smooth, going, finding, recording, making available, and hers was no, actually, you know, it's not there. You have to interrogate, you have to, you know, imagine, and you also kind of resist in a way the immediate, you know, making legible, maybe translate. There's a question also in the chat about dialect, I suppose. So maybe there's also a question of, you know, non-standard or local, you know, varieties, and do they require translation or so on. Sadna, yours is the next question. Maybe we can round up a few and then give you a chance to respond.
Okay. Thank you, Francesca, and thank you all the speakers for the wonderful presentations. I have enjoyed all of them. I have just very small questions. One, I would like to know a little more about Nabati poetry. And, you know, there was a slide you showed, the second last slide, with something written on a building, I think. If you could tell us what that was. Thank you.
And also, maybe we can have one more. So then here we've got another question instead for Jude. I'm a starter poet, and this is the first time I've seen a poet like you who wrote using English and Arabic in one poem. Yeah, and I suppose, again, maybe I can also ask my question of that, to that, and my question, which is to say, I mean, I'm very sympathetic. You know, I think this urge to immediately understand, immediately translate, you know, can be usefully paused or slowed down and so on, and make particularly English readers or listeners, you know, feel like, oh, it's not that they command the language and everybody else has to adapt, but they also have to, you know, they may lose something out by only knowing English or not knowing the language. So I'm very sympathetic to that. But I wonder, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to not understand, or do you imagine that the text or the reading is to be accompanied by an explanation? You know, so like you say, you know, there's a text, but then you talk about it, you know, which again brings us back to something that Karin Barber talks about in her book on, you know, anthropology of text, which she says, well, there's a text, and then there's usually a category of people who are going to explain to you the text. So the text on its own is almost, you know, consciously cryptic, or consciously, you know, to be interpreted with the aid of somebody else. And maybe I can, since nobody has asked yet, I can ask a question of Lourdes as well, which is to say, I was very struck in your talk by the temporality of it, you know? So in a way, you know, if we think of heritage and so on, we think of or transmission and preservation of something that has been going on for a long time, and then, you know, you intervene in that. But here you were creating something, and actually you were, you know, it seemed like very much the process of, you know, something that then became a text or a video or a set of objects, materials, and so on. But that was it, you know, it wasn't part of a sort of continuous transmission. But on the other hand, there was a lot of, you know, a lot that came through in your presentation about maybe what you hope to animate or to, you know, to start up in individuals and in the place through the process. So I wonder if you wanted to say something more about that. And I don't know if we want to start from, do you want to start? And we can go in the order of the presenters. Yeah,
we can go in order.
And we have more questions, sorry, general questions. So maybe Marie-Lourdes, you can also respond. Did you notice any variations in the motivations for individuals to participate and share their memories? Okay. And then what is the choice of term Nabati poetry? Why not call it folk poetry? That goes back to Sadhna's point. Now I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Would you like us to answer the questions about the questions that everyone asked regarding the local community and how you gain the information.
Yeah, actually, since you started, why don't you start? Maybe you had more questions, you, Haifa and Ebtisam. So you had some questions. You said this question about Nabati versus folk, and you had a question of methodologies. Yeah.
Yes. So the thing is about collecting data from the local community is actually one of the main things that we focus on is their consent. They need to seek us to document their heritage, whether it's oral expressions or any other of the 5 UNESCO domains. So we usually go to the areas. I was on the field in this project. I was personally on this field, and we collected data, and the local community were so excited to share their culture with us. And the interesting thing about the language and oral traditions is that I'm not familiar with the southern Saudi accent or dialect, but spending time with them, I actually adapted to understand exactly what they are trying to say. So this is the interesting thing about adaptability in language and dialects. This was very important in during our data collection. And usually our methods and our programs, the best programs in data collection is, one of them is King Abdulaziz Foundation for Research and Archives, which collects like data regarding history of Saudi Arabia. There is the UNESCO efforts as well. There are festivals and activities that the Heritage Commission does to protect and safeguard these oral traditions as well. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, there was also Sadna's question about what is Nabati poetry.
Sure, I can answer that. Well, tapping into what Haifa mentioned, it's always this approach of crowdsourcing. It's people who wanted us to do the documentation or to support their initiatives of documentation. It's always the communities who are at the heart of any documentation activity. For us, it's written and it's documented on a digital platform, but as Haifa mentioned, for Dara or King Abdulaziz Foundation, it is the recordings of oral interviews with those individuals. Why Nabati? Because local communities wanted Nabati poetry. It's very common in Saudi Arabia. It's one of the most celebrated forms of poetry in Saudi Arabia, and it's recited by nomads, by Bedouins, by doctors, by princes, by people of all, I'll say, backgrounds. And when we decided to go ahead and ask, what do you consider as part of your valuable intangible cultural heritage that you want to celebrate? Most of the communities in all regions of Saudi Arabia agreed that this is one of their most celebrated form of oral tradition. And this is something that we wanted to document and share with other countries. So it's always encouraged to lead files or to inscribe elements that are celebrated across a wider geographic area. And hence, the choice of this kind of poetry, which is also called local, dialectal, as the question mentioned, folk poetry. They're all like synonyms of the same oral expression.
Right. Okay, thank you. So Marie Lourdes or Jude? Marie Lourdes, do you want to start? Yeah.
If I've good understood, you asked me for telling about the process. How did we do the project? Okay, the process. I think I can say it was easy, but it was very long because people had to recover, to think on their memories, but we had a lot of people helping us. For example, people, professionals working at the nursing homes that were in touch every day with people, with elderly people. Told every day with the participants and asked them to tell them the memories, and the professionals were reading and they elaborate a report of each participant, a report with memories of each participant, because participants, they were aged, 80 years or even more, and they were afraid of not being able the day to tell the memories, not being able to remember. So they were helped by the psychologists of the nursing elderly, by the people working in there.
And these were
we
memories
were,
of Pobleto, or Pobleto was more like the place where it happened?
Sorry, could you repeat?
The memories of the elderly people were memories of the place, of their experience.
Yes, of the place. We choose people that were emotionally linked with the place. And so they were memorizing facts on their childhood, when maybe someone of them were working in there. The father Joseph was a member of the community. So different memories. And I think the special thing of our project was we didn't work with oral traditions that made Dan, so they create a new oral tradition, I think.
And if
I
I can
don't
add,
know.
did it have any, are these oral traditions that live on in some way, you could say, either in individuals or in the, or I mean, apart from the, the films that you made, but is there any other way that they live on?
Not sure. Could you repeat the question?
Never mind. That's okay. And Jude, do you want to answer your questions? You had the one in the chat, and yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Beginning with Fajr, I think this hybrid form wasn't really intentional. It came from a strictly, I feel, moral and ethical way to maintain my grandfather's voice. And so this hybrid form also caters towards myself as the reader and the many people like me that are globalized bodies now that exist in bilingual forms. I know the English, in order for me to send a message, it has to go through the Western canon. And so maintaining my grandfather's tonation, the script in Arabic is all incredibly important for me as a mode of resistance. And I think this also answers Johra's question, and that is the harakat, is it reliable for safeguarding dialectical features? I don't think it's about safeguarding as much as about resisting and anti-translating as a mode of, this is what I want to send, and it needs to be read in silence and thought about, because not everything needs to be, I feel, catered and written explicitly.
Very, very, very interesting. Do we have more questions? I mean, I can see that some are more specifically, is it all 13 regions, or somebody who wants to collaborate? Are local communities happy about translating? I suppose one question is really about, the further I mean, are you recording Sam and Haifa, or are you also translating, and then how?
So when First, the evidence of this oral tradition being practiced across the regions is that we utilize Heritage Commission is very blessed that it has branches all over the kingdom, and we utilize these branches as means of communication with local communities all across the kingdom. We made sure that we conduct workshops and focused groups all through these branches to make sure that the input of those communities is captured. So this is one. The second, we're not here looking at translating or documenting verses of poetry. We're here shedding the light on the practice itself, on this kind of oral tradition as means of transmitting knowledge, virtues, values across generations, and the willing of the younger generation to actually go ahead and learn ways of reciting this type of poetry. So it's the fluidity of it. It's what shapes it as part of the local identity. It's what is transmitted from a generation to another. It's not just the verses. It's not the written, poems that we're trying to register here.
Okay, I think we probably should move ahead and have our next two speakers. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and please, if you have more questions, put them in the chat or keep them for the next session. So my great pleasure. Our next speaker is Professor Sadna Naithani of Jawaharlal Nehru University, who's going to speak on transnational and transcultural aspects of oral traditions. And if you haven't read her books, I have, and please go and, there are wonderful books on folkloristics, not just, in fact, in South Asia, but also other parts of the world. She herself is a Germanist by training. So go ahead, Sadna. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Francesca, and thank you, everyone. Please bear with me for a second as I will turn on my presentation. Right. So can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, and can you hear me too? Good, thank you. Thank you, Francesca, once again for chairing this session. And I would like to start my paper by thanking Dr. Munira Al-Ghadir for inviting me to this UNESCO workshop on translating oral traditions and the safeguarding of cultural heritage, being hosted online by King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies, Saudi Arabia. I'm delighted to be part of this group, which includes 4 UNESCO chairs, I understand, in translating cultures, and look forward to discussions on this important idea, translating cultures with reference to oral cultural heritage. So in my presentation today, I will speak from my location in the disciplines of folklore, folkloristics, cultural anthropology, and ethnography. And as the title of my paper states, this talk is about transnational and transcultural aspects of expressive oral cultures or folklore. I have a little note here just to say that I'll be using these terms somewhat interchangeably. Oral cultural expression, also abbreviated as OCE, and which is also folklore and intangible cultural heritage. I'm not stating that it is so, I'm using it in this manner for this talk. So my talk is on the transnational and transcultural aspects of folklore, and I realize that these categories, transnational and transcultural, are often not used while referring to oral cultures, folklore, etc. And I may say that my slides here are created with a sense that in case I'm not very understandable in my oral transmission, then the text is very close to what I have as a paper, and you can also follow it there. So, so the categories that are more likely to be used while discussing folklore reflect clear ethnic identities and spatial location. The reason for this perhaps lays in the late 18th century European, particularly German perspectives on language, lore, and nation. The reason also lays in the colonial context in which cultural anthropology grew as a subject. In both these paradigms, folklore became sort of symbol of ethnic cultural identities. The emphasis on authenticity and purity obscured the more realistic and dynamic aspects of oral cultural expressions. Now, of course, not saying that there's nothing authentic and nothing pure, but I'm saying that the emphasis on that obscured certain other aspects. So while concepts of authenticity and purity present cultures as isolated from one another, often raising associated comparative concepts, the reality is that oral cultural expressions have interacted with other cultures and ideas since forever. It is a fact that oral cultural expressions are not without international and intercultural and multilingual influences. Any local culture embodies exotic and external influences within itself, and the making of any body of folklore in any language is part of the history of that language and society in which it lives. Therefore, when we think of cultural translation, particularly with reference to folklore, we would need to take into consideration certain types of folklore translations that have already happened and also those that have not happened. So one type of cultural translation is So one type of cultural translation is embedded in modern collections of folklore. So oral cultures have been textualized, have existed in print for longer, but the modern phenomena of collections of folklore. So within national and linguistic boundaries, such collectors transformed oral expression into written texts and often changing the language of the narrators to suit the tastes of target readers. In colonial contexts, modern folklore collectors translated the languages of the colonized into those of the colonizers, and almost always deleting and adding content at will. So the second type of cultural translation is the one which is realized in empirical reality in a historical process. This has happened, this kind of translation has happened in conjunction with travel and migration of people, their languages and cultures to new locations, as also with the travel of folklore as printed text. So, for example, the travel of seminal folklore collections, modern folklore collections like Grimm's fairy tales from early 19th century has spread across the world, or of 1001 Arabian Nights before that, before the Grimm's translation. And even before that, going back to the ancient world, the travel of Indian Panchtantra fables to the European continent via Persian translations in the ancient world. So these movements of folklore have caused the existence of transnational and transcultural folklores that reflect not only ethnic identities, but also interculturality and intermixing of folklores. So the second type of cultural translation is a phenomena where folklores from two or more languages and cultures have interacted in a manner as to mix with or in each other, and they create phenomena that are transnational and transcultural in nature. This type of cultural translation in oral cultures is of interest to me, and I wish to kind of pursue it more in future. So, however, such phenomena have not been studied in relation with the concept of cultural cultural translation or translating cultures. The context in which the concept of translating cultures has originated and has been analytically applied differ. Those contexts differ from the context of folklore in essential and significant ways. So when we apply translating culture or cultural translation to written literary texts, it differs, or in other forms of texts, it differs from folklore in essential and significant ways. So two of these significant differences are, one is the travel of oral compositions, and two, similarities in world folklore. So as is well known, folklore has traveled across linguistic, cultural, and political boundaries since way before the emergence of modern collectors and translators. In its pre-modern existence, travel and translation often remained within the sphere of orality, that is, oral cultural expression traveled as oral expression and dispersed orally in its new location. Modern collectors and translators convert the oral cultural expression to written and other media. Even so, folklore continues to travel on its own and find new homes. A study of such processes, that is, whereby pre-modern dispersal of a migrant oral culture in its new location is evidenced today. So this would raise new questions for the concept of cultural translation. For example, what is the definition of cultural translation in the case of processes where a specific translator as agent of change is untraceable, if ever there was one? So what is the relationship between cultural translation, cultural transmission, and cultural assimilation? The discipline of folkloristics has not only acknowledged the fact of similarity in the content of folklore from across the world, but also developed methodological tools and theoretical perspectives to understand and explain the similarity and attendant differences as well. So the concept of cultural translation could open up the inquiry from yet another new perspective while also expanding its own conceptual horizons. Now, while it is one thing to think about translating oral culture, it is quite another to think about transnational and transcultural aspects of oral culture. In folklore studies, scholars have been aware of the travel of oral cultural expression from one region to another, covering very huge distances. Oral cultural expression also travel along with people's migrations. The distinguishing feature of such new phenomena of oral cultural expression is that it is translated in interaction with the local or pre-existing folklore. In the process, both undergo change. This, however, does not mean that they always become one integrated self. Very often, the distinct identity of the incoming migrant is maintained. This maintenance of the identity happens in many ways, sometimes along with the language of incoming migrant and sometimes without it. An example or some examples. The stories of the 1001 Arabian Nights are so widely dispersed across the world that they have adopted many other cultural influences in their retellings. Yet, their own Persian Arabic identity remains visible in many ways. A specific case would be their spread in India. They have been part of folk and popular culture for centuries, being told in oral, print, cinematic, and digital mediums. And yet, their identity as tales of exotic origin remains, as in the names and costumes of characters. The example of the spread of 1001 Arabian Nights and other oral cultural expression of Persian Arabic origin in India is a case in point, whereby cultural translation has already taken place, and very importantly, not only by scholars, but by the people themselves, in a cultural historical process. Studying this type of phenomena and studying this type of translation of oral cultures is different from deciding how to translate oral cultures. And very important as it allows us to accept that such translations of oral cultures have created new kinds of oral cultures. For example, the existence of Persian and Arabic oral folklores as part of Indian folklore. Such phenomena are transnational and transcultural in their existence and impact. They are also not studied very often, as the 19th century construction of folklore as national culture looked for ethnic and linguistic purity. Studying such transnational and transcultural folklore will not only be a documentation, but also the role folklore has played in intercultural relations among nations and languages. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'm already thinking of examples as you were speaking, but and I'll keep my question for later. So we now have our last speaker for today, Dr. Ryan Milov Cordova, professor of Scripps College from California, who's going to talk to us about the Moroccan Halqa, translation, heritage, and labor. Over to you.
Good morning from the West Coast. I think I'm the farthest west, so the sun just came up over here. Let me echo the thanks that everybody has given to the UNESCO chair and to the King Faisal Center. And thank you, Francesca, for chairing this session. I was delighted to see that you were going to chair this session because I'm of the opinion that in some ways the study of oral traditions and South Asian traditions is a really useful scholarly literature for people trying to do the same work in North Africa. Let me also briefly say thank you. I'll start sharing my screen while we do this. Also, I wanted to greet Dr. Oussama Khadraoui. He will speak tomorrow, but I have also benefited greatly from his work on the Halqa in Morocco, and I see that he's here. So let me share this. Is that clear to everybody? Can you see it? Great. I also wanted to say briefly a thank you to Eric Calderwood for suggesting my name to the Translating Cultures Lab. I haven't yet published any of my work on the Halqa, so I wondered how anybody had found out about it. I first met Eric in 2023 while I was on a Fulbright in Morocco. At that time, I had only recently begun my work. And since then, it has become one of my central scholarly concerns. Since I haven't published any of this work yet, I wanted to briefly describe the nature of the evidence that I'll be drawing on today in my talk. Last summer, I was able to organize a series of filmed interviews with 6 representatives of the Halqa, 2 of whom are among the last living master storytellers in this tradition. These interviews were carried out in partnership with the International Academy of Intangible Cultural Heritage, Maghreb al-Hikayat, in Morocco, the oldest civil society organization focused on the Halqa in the country. With the small Moroccan production team, I'm in the final stages of editing these interviews into a podcast called Limora al-Fana, After Extinction, which focuses on giving this last generation of storytellers in the Moroccan Halqa a chance to reflect on the cultural extinction of their own storytelling tradition. I conducted these interviews in Moroccan Darija, but the final podcast will offer subtitles in both English and Standard Arabic. My hope is that it will be more than a scholarly archive and reach audiences in both the Anglophone and Arabic-speaking world. Finally, I'd also like to thank the Lois Roth Foundation for Cross-Cultural Dialogue for their support of this podcast. So today, taking a slightly different tack, I want to talk about labor. In 1975, UNESCO published a special report that focused on a narrow legal problem with huge implications for thinking about labor in heritage studies. This report was entitled Consideration of the Possibility of Establishing an International Instrument for the protection of folklore. Its key finding is simple. Without protection, what today is called intangible cultural heritage will not survive the transformations of modern society. 50 years later, this prediction has come true, and the core legal problem has remained insoluble. Take any traditional storytelling practice. The basic standard of modern copyright law requires two things, both cited in the UNESCO report. So does folklore fulfill the conditions for copyright protection? For an intellectual production to be protected by copyright, it must, whether literary or artistic, have an author and be original. Traditional storytellers do not generally meet either of these standards. They draw on a shared body of stories, and they do not consider themselves the author. This problem in copyright law is one reason why today scholars working in heritage studies are often reluctant to discuss heritage as intellectual property. The idea is conceptually problematic and culturally fraught. Additionally, speaking about oral storytelling and copyright law raises ethical questions about modern life. Time is money. Markets assign value. Art is about followers on social media. These sad truisms of contemporary life feel to many like they violate the spirit of creativity, community, and ancestry that define oral traditions around the world. However, my fieldwork with the storytellers at the Halqa has convinced me that it is important to speak about the economic dimension of traditional storytelling, and the scholars can be helpful in a relatively simple manner. By reframing what traditional storytellers do in ways that are more legible to contemporary financial markets. This brings me to the main idea of my presentation today. Traditional storytelling is no longer a reliable way for individuals to make a living. However, many oral storytellers do more than tell stories. In the Moroccan Halqa, the storytellers are also translators. By reframing a storyteller's labor as a form of translation, a storyteller could, in theory, be entitled to royalties from their translations, and thus find a new source of income and professional community in a global market dominated by intellectual property. Let me just emphasize again that the context for my study is an oral tradition that I believe has died. Moroccan anthropologist Ahmed Skounti has thought about the Halqa as much as anybody alive today, and the conclusion he drew nearly 20 years ago has proven prescient. In The Authentic Illusion, he wrote, "If programs aimed at protecting the urban framework and the material conservation of memory are relatively easy to set up, the social rights of the performers and the transmission of their knowledge and know-how are a completely different ballgame. First, it is difficult to channel benefits such as pensions, allowances, and health coverage, etc., towards performers who operate in a context of urban poverty. Conversely, to limit the number of performers through a system of professional cards risks denying the relative freedom of the square to people who have always nourished it with new blood." Nevertheless, while Skounti identifies legitimate obstacles with admirable realism, he does not investigate whether the work of traditional storytellers could be reframed in such a way that it becomes legible to the market. In saying as much, let me be clear. I am not conceding that everything should be determined by the market, nor am I saying that just because this is the way things often are, that it is also the way they should be. I am, however, putting the question of what should be the case to the side for a moment to talk about what I think could be the case, given the state of society as such. In a recent piece entitled Philosophy of Work, Kwame Anthony Appiah has identified 4 things that work has historically provided since the Industrial Revolution, although unequally. Abundance of material goods, personal income, professional communities, significance, and meaning. My idea is this. By reframing traditional oral storytellers as translators, some of the problems Skounti highlights could be avoided, and a new group, who we might call national translators, could enter the market, claim their translations, and own a modest but significant element of intellectual property, which could sustain their lives. Their new name would also give them new professional standing within a global community of translators. They could be asked to speak on translation panels, teach in translation studies workshops, and work in cross-cultural affairs. On that more optimistic note, I'd like to leave you today with just a short 2-minute clip from the interviews that I mentioned at the outset. In this clip, Abdurrahman al-Mqori, one of the last master storytellers of the Marrakesh School, describes his role as a translator in the Moroccan Halqa. And I'd like to thank Noof because I asked her to pre-circulate a translation of this clip into English and Standard Arabic. And I'd also like to thank my colleague Hassan Edhabi for invaluable assistance with the translation into Arabic. So I hope the sound works. It was working, but let's see. All right, I have a backup plan. Backup plan is over here. I will just show you the QuickTime file. Sometimes the software that I use for that doesn't work. There you go.
Ryan, do you want us to put the translation in the chat for people to read?
Thank you, Francesca. That's a great idea. I didn't think about the larger webinar audience. Yeah, I'll pause for a second and let you do that. Yes.
If I can, just check.
I can do that on my end, Francesca.
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start it over. Thank you, Francesca. Good idea.
I can hear the sound in your clip anyway. Does it matter?
You can't hear it?
No.
Oh, interesting. No, there should be sound. 1 sec. Maybe it was because of this. Let's see. We stop share. And we'll do it again. Let's see.
جوج كيشوفوا الحليقية وكيعاودوا القصص ديالهم في الساحات وكيظنوا بلي الحلقة هي عرف الشفهي وصحيح، ولكن هذا ماشي كل القصة، حيتاش منين جابوا الحليقية القصص ديالهم غالبا من كتوبة. إذن واش ممكن تعاود لنا على عملية نقل القصص من الكتوبة المكتوبين بالفصحى إلى تقديم بالدارجة؟
أولاً قبل كل شيء تراث شفوي إنساني اللامادي. كانوا الوالدين في الدور يعاودوا لي الحكايات الشفوية اللي ما مكتوباش، بحال حديد درقنا، بحال عمتي الغولة، بحال
هادو الحجايات.
هادو الحجايات اللي كانوا تيحكيو والدين. أما الحكاية من ألف ليلة وليلة أو من سيار أو من كذا، كانوا اليوم ناس اللي متخصصين بهم كيكونوا في الساحات، بحال ساحة جامع الفنا، ساحة الهديم في وجدة، ساحة بوجلود في فاس، الساحة ديال الهديم في مكناس، أسرق في تارودانت، صويرة كان باب مراكش، كانوا ساحات. وهاد الساحات كانوا فيهم شيوخ اللي هما كانوا تيشدوا. تلقى عنده خزانة في الدار كما عندي انا والناس، عنده ألف ليلة وليلة، عنده عنطرية، عنده الوهابية، عنده كذا. كانوا الناس ديال ألف ليلة وليلة تيقرا القصة باللغة العربية، ولكن اللي جاي يلقيها في وسط جامع الفنا باللغة العربية عادي يفهم 21 ما عاديش تفهم. شكون الناس الأكثرية في الوقت اللي كنا حنا ما كانوش قاريين بزاف، كانوش قاضيين. ملي كترجم عليه بالدارجة كتجعل الكلام الأم، الكلام باش كيهضر هو وباه وامه وخوه والعائلة والحومة وداك الشيء، تيفهمك اش كتقول وتيفهمك اش كتعني.
So I'd love to show you more, but I think that I'll stop it there and let me just show this last slide so we can finish the credit where credit is due here. These are the organizations that helped me do this. So in this clip, Maqori lays out the central place of translation in the halqa. Imagine for a moment the massive audience that storytellers like him have served over the centuries. It makes sense to me when I imagine this process to look at Maqori's life's work as that of a translator. In this light, although it's true that nobody can own folklore, storytellers like Maqori could claim ownership of the translations which they have in fact done. And if such a project of reclamation could succeed in Morocco, it might serve as a model for thinking creatively about how to name the work that oral storytellers do in diverse traditions around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. So I think we have about 10 minutes now. I don't know if we can go a little bit over time for questions. And I don't know if there are already hands up, but maybe I can start you off. I mean, I think of this work and Sadna's work or other people's work on the revitalization of Urdu Dastan Goi in India as almost like the opposite. There you have a young person who actually can do, is a good actor and who's obviously not a storyteller in the old way, although actually he does create his stories. So he and his group, but crucially are in a different stage. They're quite savvy with the media. They are speaking to different audiences than that of the old storytellers. And though of course it's quite limited, it is a success story. I'm also thinking of and that is my question is, which was also a question to Fatima Zahra, why, since the Moroccan state is so keen on other intangible cultural forms, on certain types of songs, poetry, big on kind of culture as tourism, culture as festivals, and so on. Why is storytelling not halqa, not become part of that? Because you talk about the changing of the the status of the storyteller, but again another moment that has stayed with me and will stay with me forever was in a conference in Hawaii on, in fact, oral literatures, where mythographers, you could say, kind of organic intellectuals, people who told stories that mattered to the community, or in fact even in Ethiopia, particularly in fact in Ethiopia, interesting because it was not state supported. They had a community support, and they would speak in schools, in festivals, so I think what you're saying is true, but I also wonder whether, placing these, masters on different stages and giving them new audiences is also a way. And why is it that in Morocco they, where so many other forms are supported, they are not? And Sadna, I hope everybody's thinking now of, not the local toponyms, or names, but the foreign names in the kind of oral traditions they know. We know Shah Yemen. Yemen is, comes in a lot of stories in Urdu chapbooks, and, I have to go and read it. Noof, your question.
Thank you, Francesca. My question is a more general one related to my earlier question about kind of challenging the dominance of a textual approach to translation, and going back more to the goals of this workshop and indeed the goals of this chair and our theme for this year, which is translation, kind of tying translation to intangible heritage, and kind of the interdisciplinary approaches that we take, which I think, just as an aside, Ryan's idea of the storyteller as translator, I think relates very well to those goals. So my question, or kind of my kind of what I want the panelists to possibly expand on, is how we can try through collaborative workshops like this, through the work that we do in these UNESCO chairs, how we can try to continue to develop methodologies that acknowledge the unique epistemologies of these oral traditions and move away from Western-centric approaches to these traditions, as well as knowledge and scholarship itself, and indeed, as Ryan kind of stated, translation itself, and how we can kind of rethink those kinds of things.
I don't know if there are any other questions at the moment. I can't see other hands up. So do you want to start answering these?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you both for these questions. Francesca, you've asked kind of the question, so I'm not surprised that that was also the question that you asked Fatim Zahra. Let me begin answering by showing a picture, which offers a little bit more of how things happened historically in the halqa in Marrakesh. And broadly, I would say some of it has to do with language politics in Morocco, because the halqa is in Moroccan Arabic traditionally. There are halqas in Amazigh languages as well, but the traditional one, especially the more prominent ones in the city centers, were in Darija. And the other one I would frame broadly as the question of whether the storytelling tradition transmits wisdom or not. This is another thing that led to a change in its status. And the comparison that I always think about is not with Dastangoy, although I did, I have picked up that trail, and what happened there in terms of its commercial success, I think is a success story. Well, let me show you the picture before I say more. Someone else is sharing. Oh, so can I take over the screen sharing? Let's see. I'll send the official request.
Can somebody take off the Q&A screen so that Ryan can show the picture?
There we go. Okay. All right, so this is kind of this is a hand-drawn thing. So this is not official. This is really just for my reference. So don't take a picture of it or anything. So this is basically the famous square that storyteller in my clip worked in. So this is Jemaa el-Fna. So just for some reference here, this is one of the most famous mosques in Morocco, Koutoubia. And over here you have the walls of the Medina, which you could think of as the old city. And here you have the square. So it's called the halqa in part because the storytellers form into this ring shape. And halqa can mean ring in Arabic. So this path that we draw here has language significance. This is something that Mokori and his colleague Beres explained to me in other parts of the interview, that historically, there were basically 3 language levels of the halqa. There was one close to the mosque. And so you also have to imagine that the main time in which the stories, they happen at 3 times during the day, but the most popular one was after the evening, after Al-Asr. So in the evening after prayer. So there was one ring here where there was a storyteller who read from the Arabic epics. He did not perform orally. He had the Arabic epics in front of them and he read them. And he had a specific audience that wanted to hear these epics in the classical Arabic. Then over here, closer to the Medina walls, there was what Mokori called, this picks up on some things that you said, Sadna, the storyteller called pure Darija, Darija al-Khalisa, which is basically, these were folk tales. They were told more into the Medina. So it was in this space between the commercial area of the Medina and the mosque that what I call the literary halqa happened. And this is the halqa that he belonged to, which mixed, I would say, the wisdom elements that people got from religious practice and the folktale elements that they got from the pure folk tales. So part of what happened to the halqa in the 20th century, Of course, all of the common themes across the Global South in terms of globalization, English becoming a global language, the spread of technology and radio, that is one wave of globalization that hit the Halqa. But there were other factors as well. One of them, for those of you who know about Moroccan history, you may know that there was a powerful, if contentious movement called Ta'rib in the middle to latter part, Arabization, which had very critical views of the indigenous Moroccan Arabic. So the storytellers lost some status in that context. And they lost their status as holders of a wisdom tradition for reasons that are maybe too complicated to get into here. But between those two losses, they lost their audience.
Right. This still, I understand, but, thinking that a lot of Moroccan music or songs seems to be in Darja and that works, I still have a question, but I don't know if Sadna wants to answer the, Nouf's question or the part that was related to you.
Right. Well, I would love to answer Noof's question, which, if I understand right, was what should we be doing? But I think that's a very, very big area. We really need to open up another round of discussion only on that question. So I think that's much as I would like to, I do not think I'd be able to. I think in some ways, the discussions that the papers that I have heard today and the kind of case studies, if I may say, have come forth. They are themselves suggesting as to what kind of methodologies we have used and we can use in further. I think that way, Dr. Loda's work and also Jude's work and on Nabati. There's so much of innovation already there. So I was feeling that, a lot of these elements are actually already coming in. And of course, Ryan, if I may, your work that you've talked about and that Francesca mentioned about the Dastan Goi in India and in Delhi. So now that too in 1928 is supposed to have been the last performance on a street, which is where it should have happened. But then somebody else tries to revive it. And that 1928 was not documented on any audiovisual material, like not even cinema. And yet it is possible even from the text themselves and the oral memory of the oral narration to kind of revive it. Yes, I think it's quite clear that it's also something new, yet it maintains its connection with something that has been. So I'm kind of hopeful when you say that it has died. I would say, no, let's wait. It might resurrect, it might revive again. I would much like to believe. So that much, certainly. And I feel that the storytelling tradition that you are talking about, and that very similar situation of professional storytellers with a documented tradition of 700 years of storytellers that I have worked with who, practicing Muslims who actually narrate Hindu religious songs and stories. How do those identities and those practices and their audiences, how do they work with it? It's actually a very, very postmodern situation and can actually help us to understand the way we deal with so much of multiculturality in our local spaces. So I don't think I'm missing a question that was asked, Francesca, or if I am, please tell me.
No, I think that was a great way. I don't know if Ryan, you want to add something about translation? I saw that you, in a way, you did give us one way, which was not to give a separate text. Also, and maybe last point I want to make, in our oral literary worlds volume, when we think about we note really the way in which a lot of translations of oral forms like songs or which are, for which YouTube becomes a kind of vast archive. Translation happens very differently than, printed books or so on. It seems to be much more on the hoof, or in the somebody in the comments, or it's more distributed, and these are also ways in which maybe partial, so different ways of thinking about translation when the need, of course, for translation is there. Ryan, do you want to say a last few words?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for your insights as well, Sadna. I admit that I'm discovering your work in this workshop, and I look forward to investigating it more. Let me talk about something positive, which is what you brought about revitalization. So the organization that I'm working with, Maghreb Hikayat, or the International Academy for Intangible Cultural Heritage in Morocco, which is led by an academic, Dr. Najima Taiteh Ghazali, who started out studying folktales in the Oujda region, specifically ones about the figure of the Oud. So this organization has been working for 30 years to revitalize this tradition. And if they had not been, I would not be able to do the research. It would be like the Dastangoy situation where we wouldn't have the visual. Most of the audiovisual stuff that has been recorded for the halqa has happened in the last 20 years. So first of all, that has been a great success. I don't mean to underplay the success of that revitalization. I think I've been just really struck by the economic problem that the storytellers face. And I think that's what motivates some of my framing and some of my desire to talk about cultural extinction, because I think part of what leads to cultural extinction is a reluctance to engage the sometimes boring, sometimes depressing economic realities that sustain these traditions. As for translation, maybe I can bring in another thing about the same organization. They host an annual storytelling festival. They're in their 23rd year, and it started out as a local Moroccan scene, but now it's very international. And so one of the places that you see, and to pick up on your question about collaboration, Noof, you can look into this festival. They translate folk tales from, I think maybe, Najima, I think it's 30 countries, a lot of countries, and they appoint kind of a country of honor each year. I believe last country was Mauritania, and they do a week of events, and that festival is a huge success. So there are successes that are happening as well.
Great. And I don't know if, and in fact, I think the example I love from Fatima Zahra Salih's work was that one of the storytellers she worked on, what he did was translate or retell stories of Hindi films into the Darja for his so that kind of speaks to both Sadna's point and to Ryan's point. So I think we can probably, we're only slightly over time, but I think you all kept, we put, I think, a lot of questions on the floor and very different experiences, which I think what the first day of workshops should do. And we had really a wonderful different array of presentations. So I think my job is just to thank everybody and thank Munira, thank Noof, thank the King Faisal Center and all the speakers, of course, and say goodbye until tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.